Flight attendant slaps elderly woman, shocks everyone when the governor steps in. Welcome, dear viewers, to a tale that unfolds high above the clouds, where pride collides with humility and a single impulsive act changes lives forever. In this riveting story, we follow an unassuming elderly traveler, quietly boarding a commercial flight, and a flight attendant blinded by ambition and irritation. When their paths cross, tempers flare, leading to a shocking moment that no one on board could have anticipated. Little does anyone realize that this gentle passenger is no ordinary senior citizen. She holds secrets that will send the entire flight into a frenzy. Brace yourselves for a chain of twists, revelations, and unforgettable karmic payback you'll never see coming. Let's begin. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Dolores Montgomery walked ever so slowly down the busy corridor of John F. Kennedy International Airport. Her weathered hands clutched a small, well-loved carry-on bag containing her most essential items. Though she was in her late 70s, Dolores had the silent determination of a seasoned traveler. She had flown countless times over the years, usually under the radar. Today, she quietly moved along the shiny airport floors, shuffling past families, lugging oversized suitcases, and business people rushing to catch connecting flights. Her destination was Los Angeles, a trip she made every few months for family reasons no one around her could guess. To any stranger, she was simply another unassuming passenger. Yet there was something different about her presence if one looked carefully. She maintained a graceful composure, gliding as if she had all the time in the world. Occasionally, her eyes flickered with a distinct intelligence. She paused by a window to watch a Boeing 737 on the tarmac, sporting the large Delta Airlines logo, preparing for the cross-country flight she would soon board. A wistful smile crossed her lips, as if she knew more about the events about to unfold than anyone could imagine. Standing near the gate, Dolores softly greeted a mother struggling with 2 energetic toddlers. The mother thanked her kindly for offering to help wrangle a runaway shoe that had fallen off one child's foot. Dolores noticed how stressful travel could be for many people, but she tried to keep a calm aura about her. Had anyone paused to ask her name, they might have recognized it from statewide news reports or political circles, but nobody did. She preferred it that way. In a corner of the waiting area, behind the gate attendant's desk, stood Vanessa Caldwell, the flight attendant assigned to greet and manage boarding passengers. Vanessa's eyes flicked over the crowd in mild irritation, already dreading the 6-hour trip to the West Coast. She barely spared the older woman a second glance, mentally grouping her in with all the slow boarders she would have to rush along. Vanessa's day was about to turn into a high-stakes drama, though she had no idea how deeply her life would be affected by this unassuming elderly traveler. Vanessa Caldwell considered herself a consummate professional. At least, that's what she told her supervisors at every performance review. She wore her polished Delta Airlines uniform like armor, her hair pulled into a tight bun that tolerated no stray strands. In her mind, there were 2 categories of passengers, those who cooperated and those who didn't, and she had developed an ironclad set of rules for handling both types. However, behind her sparkling smile lay a short fuse. The demands of her job, dealing with demanding flyers, unpredictable weather delays, and an unforgiving schedule had chipped away at her patience over time. She prided herself on being in control of her environment. Whenever a situation threatened that control, she found herself growing anxious and irritable. Her colleagues had taken notice, though few dared confront her about it. This morning, she was on edge even more than usual. The flight had been delayed by over an hour due to a last-minute mechanical inspection. Passengers kept pestering her for updates, as if she personally had the power to fix the plane's malfunction. Babies cried, elderly travelers asked for extra assistance, and a group of college kids were loudly complaining they might miss their connecting flight. Vanessa felt the stress mounting. In her mind, it was all unnecessary hassle. As she surveyed the boarding gate, her eyes landed on Dolores, who was carefully checking her boarding pass. Vanessa made a snap judgment. This was another slow-moving passenger who might hold up the line, ask for special treatment, or otherwise frustrate her day. But Dolores didn't rush forward with questions or demands. She merely waited for the announcement, eyes cast downward in her quiet, patient way. Vanessa smirked slightly. She thought about the upcoming flight. 6 hours trapped in a giant metal tube with 100 or so souls, some kind, some clueless, and some downright rude. It was going to be a long day. Her only glimmer of relief was the knowledge that once they landed in Los Angeles, she had a 2-day layover before her next assignment. She was counting the minutes even before she had boarded the aircraft. The voice over the PAR system crackled to life, announcing that Flight 742 to Los Angeles would begin boarding in 10 minutes. A collective sigh of relief and a surge of motion rippled through the waiting area. Families hustled to gather items, business travelers made final phone calls, and flight attendants, led by Vanessa, stood by the doors with a forced sense of professional calm. In that moment, Dolores felt a quick pang of nerves. She rarely revealed it, but traveling alone at her age could still be unnerving. The world rushed around her at a much faster pace. People with headphones and mobile phones pressed in from every side. She tried to steady herself on the seat's armrest as she rose. A flight attendant from another gate noticed her slight wobble and asked if she needed assistance, but Dolores politely declined, her gentle smile erasing any concern. As the gate attendant began calling boarding zones, a harried couple with enormous carry-ons cut in front of Dolores, nearly tripping her. Instead of complaining, she stepped back and allowed them to pass, never one to escalate conflict. Vanessa, who was scanning boarding passes, was engrossed in a conversation with another co-worker and missed the entire near accident. Dolores clutched her ticket, stepping forward when her group was called. A faint beep confirmed that her pass was valid. Vanessa only gave a cursory glance at Dolores. "Down the hall to the left," she said curtly, then turned to the next passenger. There was no greeting, no smile. Dolores, accustomed to courteous flight attendants of yesteryear, felt a small sting, but let it pass. She made her way into the jet bridge, which hummed with the cold draft of the air conditioning. She rubbed at her arms to ward off the chill, thinking that maybe the flight would be less chaotic once everyone settled down. Little did she know that this flight would be anything but peaceful. Once on board, Dolores took a moment to find her seat 22A. It was a window seat, something she specifically requested because she loved watching the clouds swirl beneath her. Sliding her carry-on into the overhead bin proved more difficult than usual this time. She was no longer as strong as she once was. A tall young man in the aisle seat, wearing a backpack and a kind smile, immediately offered to help. Grateful, Dolores thanked him, and he carefully positioned her bag in the overhead compartment. She settled into her seat, feeling a small wave of relief. A few rows ahead, Vanessa was in a tense conversation with a passenger who insisted on storing an oversized suitcase in the overhead bin. The bag wouldn't fit. The passenger refused to gate check it. Their voices rose, attracting attention from others in the cabin. Vanessa's frustration escalated, and she finally signaled for another flight attendant to handle the matter, muttering under her breath about incompetent travelers. She then snapped at a child who was jumping around the aisle, telling the parents to keep him seated. The looks on people's faces suggested they found Vanessa's demeanor unnecessarily harsh. Dolores overheard the tension, but tried to focus on adjusting the overhead light and vents. She thought about how times had changed. Flight attendants used to exude warmth and hospitality, or so she recalled from her earlier experiences in simpler eras. Now everything felt rushed, businesslike, and often combative, as if every moment was a potential confrontation. Just as Dolores was beginning to relax, another passenger, a woman wearing a large sun hat, fumbled with her purse, dropping a bottle of water that rolled under Dolores's seat. Dolores leaned down to grab it, and just as she sat up, Vanessa marched down the aisle, scolding the woman for an open container. The flight attendant then shot Dolores a pointed glance, as though suspecting Dolores was involved. Feeling flustered by the unwarranted scrutiny, Dolores murmured a quiet apology, despite not having done anything wrong. She couldn't shake a feeling of unease. If Vanessa was this short-tempered before takeoff, what might happen once they were in the air? The tension only thickened when the captain announced another short delay for final checks. Passengers groaned in unison, some continuing to fiddle with phones, others flipping through magazines. Dolores closed her eyes and breathed deeply, recalling a family memory that always soothed her. A summer afternoon on her son's farm, the fields golden beneath the sun, the air filled with the peaceful hum of cicadas. She was counting silently to calm her nerves, trying to remain patient. Up ahead, Vanessa's voice rose once more. This time, it was directed at an elderly gentleman who had accidentally taken someone else's seat. The airline's complicated ticketing had caused a seat assignment mix-up, but Vanessa seemed to have no tolerance for any confusion. She berated the old man, who hunched his shoulders and stammered an apology as he shuffled out of the seat. The sight pulled at Dolores's heartstrings. She disliked seeing anyone humiliated, especially older adults who might just be overwhelmed. A ripple of discontent traveled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried or irritated looks. A few whispered among themselves about Vanessa's behavior. Still, the plane was nearly full, and with boarding complete, everyone hoped the flight would finally be on its way. But the day's challenges had only begun. When the cabin door finally closed and the flight attendants took their positions for the safety demonstration, Dolores watched with genuine attention. She had memorized these instructions years ago, but she respected their importance. Vanessa performed the motion stiffly, forced smile never reaching her eyes. Dolores could sense the coiled tension in the woman's stance. Something about the flight attendant's cold stare made Dolores uneasy, as if a storm was about to break. The engines roared to life, and the Boeing 737 began to taxi away from the gate. Dolores felt a flutter of both excitement and unease in her chest. Travel was supposed to be routine, yet fate had a way of stirring the pot in the most unexpected ways. Dolores had no idea just how turbulent this journey would become for everyone on board. The plane ascended smoothly at first. Dolores gazed out the window, marveling at how quickly the urban sprawl of New York City was replaced by a patchwork of clouds and open sky. She pressed her head gently against the window, letting the hum of the engines comfort her. In the seat next to her, the young man who had helped with her carry-on was jotting notes in a small notebook, occasionally glancing in her direction as if to check on her well-being. Up front, Vanessa was busy handing out beverage napkins and scanning the rows for any potential rule breakers. She spotted a teenager scrolling through his phone, apparently forgetting to switch it to airplane mode, and hurried over, chastising him in a curt whisper that carried a threatening edge. The teen rolled his eyes, but complied. Vanessa's lips tightened into a thin line. When the seatbelt sign blinked off, Dolores took the opportunity to stretch her legs. She carefully made her way to the restroom, politely squeezing past the man in the aisle seat. On her way, she inadvertently brushed shoulders with Vanessa, who was returning from the galley. The flight attendant shot her a glare, as though offended by the accidental contact. Dolores apologized softly and continued down the aisle, her heart pounding a little faster than she liked. In the restroom, she splashed cool water on her face, staring into the mirror. She felt her own stress rising, spurred on by the flight attendant's constant tension. She reminded herself that everything would be fine. This was just a normal flight with a cranky staff member, something plenty of travelers encountered every day. She dabbed her face dry and steadied herself, but a voice deep inside warned her that normalcy was unraveling faster than she realized. Returning to her seat, Dolores noticed that the man beside her had fallen asleep. She carefully slid back into her spot, doing her best not to disturb him. Just as she settled, an unexpected jolt rattled the cabin. It wasn't severe turbulence, but enough to make several passengers gasp. The seatbelt sign chimed on. People quickly obeyed, clicking their belts in place. Dolores felt her heart flutter with a twinge of anxiety. Vanessa's voice came over the intercom, instructing everyone to remain seated. The flight attendant's tone was clipped and no nonsense, as though scolding rather than reassuring. Dolores frowned. She remembered a time when the cabin crew would remind everyone to stay calm, offering gentle reassurance. Now, everything felt like an order barked through a megaphone. The plane stabilized, but the tension lingered in the air. A child started to cry, and the mother tried to hush him. Dolores wondered if the slight turbulence had shaken the little boy's nerves. It certainly had made her own heart jump. Moments later, Vanessa briskly made her way down the aisle, checking seatbelts and overhead compartments. As she passed Dolores's row, the older woman felt a pang of nerves. She lowered her eyes, hoping to avoid attracting any notice. But fate had other plans. The passenger behind Dolores, an older man with hearing difficulties, hadn't heard the seatbelt instruction and was attempting to stand. Vanessa snapped at him sharply, telling him to listen next time. He protested that he needed the restroom urgently, but Vanessa insisted he stay put. Dolores, who had turned to see if she could help the gentleman, caught Vanessa's gaze for a brief second. It was a look that seemed to dare anyone to contradict her. Dolores swallowed, her throat feeling dry. The older man slumped back into his seat, humiliated. She tried to shake off the incident, but a growing sense of dread bloomed in her chest. Something about Vanessa's aggression was spiraling, and she feared it might soon find another target. Sure enough, the moment arrived sooner than Dolores could have imagined. The plane had settled into smoother skies, and the flight attendants began the drink service. Vanessa's cart rattled down the aisle, distributing tiny bags of pretzels and miniature plastic cups. When she reached Dolores's row, the older woman politely asked for water. She had a slight cough, and her throat felt parched, possibly from the tense cabin air or just from the stress of the day. Vanessa paused, one brow arched. She poured water into a plastic cup, handing it to Dolores without the usual courtesy. Just as Dolores reached to take the cup, the cart lurched forward with a small jolt of turbulence. The water splashed out, wetting Dolores's hand and a corner of Vanessa's uniform. Startled, Dolores gasped and tried to apologize, but Vanessa jerked her arm away as if Dolores had purposely thrown the water. "You need to be careful," Vanessa hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. Several nearby passengers glanced up, startled by the venom in the flight attendant's tone. Dolores felt heat rise to her cheeks. She stammered an apology, explaining the jolt in the plane, but Vanessa merely glared. As quickly as it happened, the flight attendant snatched a napkin from the cart, dabbed at her uniform, and moved on to the next row. The tension lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Dolores's shoulders sagged. She hated creating a scene. A wave of embarrassment washed over her. The young man beside her, awake now, gave her a sympathetic look. Dolores tried to smile it off, but her heartbeat wouldn't slow. She gripped the armrest, telling herself that she just needed to make it through the rest of this flight. They would land in Los Angeles, and she could go about her plans without any further incident. but something in Vanessa's piercing stare warned her it wasn't over yet. Karmic wheels had been set in motion, and no one could halt them now. The next hour passed without major disturbances, though an unsettling silence enveloped the cabin. It felt as though everyone was tiptoeing around a dormant volcano. Dolores flipped through the in-flight magazine, glancing at articles about exotic travel destinations. Each time a flight attendant passed, she tensed, worried another confrontation would erupt. Eventually, a call bell chimed a few rows behind Dolores. Someone was requesting help. Vanessa appeared, a forced smile stretching her lips, though her eyes still smoldered with irritation. The passenger, a mother holding a restless toddler, asked for a spare blanket. She was trying to put her child to sleep. Vanessa provided the blanket, but did so with a barely concealed sigh. The mother thanked her, and Vanessa strode away, her posture rigid. Dolores tried to refocus on the article in front of her. It was about the new Apple Park campus in Cupertino, describing its cutting-edge design and the futuristic ring-like structure. She'd always had an interest in technology, even though she came from a generation for whom computers arrived late in life. Still, she found innovation fascinating. It reminded her of her son's progress in politics, how he'd leveraged modern technology to connect with voters, turning the old ways of campaigning on its head. Her son, Governor Montgomery, had once said, "Mom, if you keep up with technology, you keep up with the world." Dolores had smiled at the time, feeling a mix of pride and amusement at how far he'd come. Of course, very few people realized that the sweet older lady seated in 22A had raised the charismatic state governor, and today she had chosen to travel incognito, not wanting any special treatment. She never sought attention. She wanted to simply blend in and enjoy the anonymity of being an ordinary traveler. In that moment, a whisper of a thought crossed her mind. What if she needed Mark's help? She quickly brushed it away. She had always handled her own challenges. She wouldn't disturb his busy schedule unless it was absolutely necessary. Nonetheless, fate was coiling around her, preparing to tighten its hold in a way that would make her realize that sometimes anonymity was not enough. A sudden jarring shake rattled the entire aircraft. The overhead lights flickered, and the seatbelt sign lit up again. The captain's calm voice echoed over the speakers, warning of mild turbulence as they passed through a weather system. Passengers tensed, knuckles whitening against the armrests. Dolores inhaled slowly, coaching herself to remain calm. She had flown through plenty of rough patches in her lifetime, but that never stopped her pulse from quickening. As the plane rocked, a few scattered items clattered to the floor cups, a phone, and a small container of peanuts. Flight attendants quickly took their jump seats, strapping in. Vanessa, who was nearest the front, nearly slipped when hurrying to secure herself. Her frustration was palpable, even from a distance. She gripped the seat with a fierce scowl. While the turbulence lasted only a few minutes, it felt like an eternity to many on board. Dolores watched the seat in front of her jostle so severely that the passengers' hair whipped back and forth. Children whimpered, parents tried to soothe them, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. Then, as quickly as it came, the shaking subsided. The captain reassured them that clearer skies lay ahead. Once the plane settled into a smoother altitude, Vanessa wasted no time in returning to the aisle. Her cheeks were flushed. Whether from embarrassment or pent-up rage was unclear, but she strode with a mission. Wordlessly, she began picking up the scattered cups and wrappers, shoving them into a trash bag with unnecessary force. Passengers looked on, some grateful she was cleaning up, others wary of her bristling energy. When she reached Dolores's row, she spotted a small bag of pretzels on the floor, just behind Dolores's feet. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She held out the trash bag, clearly expecting Dolores to pick up the item and dispose of it. Dolores, seeing Vanessa's expression, immediately leaned down to grab the pretzels. She offered a soft apology for the mess, even though she hadn't caused it. Vanessa huffed and moved on. No words were exchanged, but the tension was painfully clear. A quiet storm was brewing between them, and all it would take was one spark to set it ablaze. A subdued calm returned for the next stretch of the flight, punctuated by the white noise of the engines and the occasional sniffle or cough from tired passengers. Dolores tried to doze off, resting her head against the window. She drifted through a haze of half-sleep, memories mingling with the present. She recalled the time her son had first told her he was running for governor. She had been proud, but also worried for him. Politics was a rough world, but Mark had navigated it with grace. She felt that same protective worry now, though this time it was directed at herself. Something in her gut told her that a confrontation loomed. Her intuition was right. A commotion stirred her awake. Vanessa was standing in the aisle, addressing a passenger 2 rows ahead of Dolores. The passenger was a middle-aged woman with a service dog, a small, well-behaved terrier on a special harness. Vanessa's voice was sharp, accusing the woman of not disclosing the service dog before the flight. The passenger tried to explain she had, in fact, notified the airline, but the documentation must not have been passed along. She also produced an official letter from her doctor. The dog was for emotional support, but Vanessa was adamant, raising her voice so others began to stare. Dolores's protective instincts flickered. She considered offering support to the passenger but hesitated, unsure if her interjection would fuel Vanessa's ire. Instead, she watched with an anxious heart. The woman, on the brink of tears, tried to remain composed, gently stroking her dog's fur to calm herself. Finally, another flight attendant, a more level-headed woman named Carla, stepped in to diffuse the situation, quietly escorting the distressed passenger to a vacant seat in a row that had more space for the dog. As Vanessa glared at Carla, it was clear she didn't appreciate being second-guessed or overshadowed. Dolores felt a pang of worry for Carla too. She feared that the flight attendant's anger would soon seek another outlet, another target. And that target, Dolores sensed with mounting apprehension, could very well be her. Dolores decided that a trip to the lavatory might ease some of her tension. She unbuckled her seatbelt just as the seatbelt sign turned off and carefully made her way down the aisle. Her knees felt a bit stiff, a reminder of her age. She moved slowly, mindful of not bumping into other passengers. When she reached the lavatory, she found it was occupied. So she stood in line, holding onto the backs of seats to keep her balance. Near the front galley, Vanessa was engaged in a hushed argument with Carla. From where Dolores stood, it was impossible to catch every word, but the snippets were enough. Overstepping, undermining me, and that woman with the dog. Carla tried to maintain a calm demeanor, her gestures placating, but Vanessa was clearly fuming. At one point, Vanessa's gaze cut through the cabin and briefly met Dolores's eyes. The older woman felt a chill snake down her spine. She quickly averted her gaze, pretending to study the overhead compartment. The lavatory door opened, and Dolores slipped inside. The claustrophobic space offered a momentary refuge from the swirling tension outside. She leaned against the sink, inhaling and exhaling in steady counts. All she needed was to get through the next few hours. Los Angeles was on the horizon. She had important family matters to attend to, including a private event with her son, Governor Montgomery, and her granddaughter, who was graduating college. Thinking of her family's warm reception waiting at LAX gave her strength. But as she emerged from the lavatory, life had other plans. Vanessa, carrying a tray of orange juices, was rushing past. It seemed she hadn't expected Dolores to exit at that moment. They collided in a flurry of arms and trays. Orange liquid splashed across the front of Vanessa's uniform and onto Dolores's blouse. The tray clattered to the floor, plastic cups rolling in every direction. For a split second, the entire world seemed to freeze. Passengers turned. Carla stood in shock. Dolores gasped, apologizing profusely. Then Vanessa's face twisted into a mask of outrage, and the words that spilled from her lips would forever change the course of this flight and Dolores's life. "What is wrong with you?" Vanessa snarled, ignoring the fact that the collision had been at least partly her own fault. She grabbed handfuls of napkins from a nearby drawer and began dabbing furiously at her stained uniform. The older woman, still reeling, tried to help, but Vanessa shoved her hands away. "I'm sorry," Dolores started, but her apology was cut short by a sharp command. "Don't touch me," Vanessa snapped, her tone carrying enough volume to make heads turn. Passengers craned their necks, some rising slightly from their seats to get a better view. The tension in the cabin reached a fever pitch. Dolores's cheeks burned with humiliation. She could barely find her voice to form words. Carla rushed over. "Vanessa, calm down," she whispered urgently. She gently placed a hand on Dolores's arm and guided her back toward her seat. "It was an accident," Carla insisted, trying to soothe the situation. But Vanessa's anger flashed anew, and she turned on Carla. "You stay out of this," Vanessa hissed. "I've had enough meddling for one day." She flung the soaked napkins aside, then pointed a trembling finger at Dolores. "People like you need to watch where you're going. You're old enough to know better than to be stumbling around." A hush fell. Dolores's eyes went wide. Never in her decades of traveling had she been spoken to so harshly by cabin crew. The heartbreak of being publicly belittled warred with the rising anger at being treated this way. Suddenly, in a flash of movement that seemed surreal, Vanessa stepped forward and swung her hand in a sharp slap across Dolores's cheek. The crack echoed in the stunned silence of the cabin. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a collective gasp filled the aisle. Shock radiated through Dolores, her eyes brimming with tears she fought to suppress. She gingerly raised a trembling hand to her stinging cheek, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Chaos erupted. Several passengers jumped to their feet, outraged. One man shouted, "How dare you?" while others fumbled for their phones, desperate to capture the incident on video. Carla intervened, stepping between Vanessa and Dolores, arms outstretched, as if physically shielding Dolores from any further assault. Dolores struggled to breathe, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The sting on her cheek throbbed with heat, but worse was the humiliation. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall in front of the entire cabin. A swirl of thoughts churned in her mind. How could this have escalated so quickly? Why would a flight attendant resort to violence? Passengers yelled from various rows, demanding an explanation, calling for the pilot or for air marshals. In the midst of the uproar, Vanessa's face was a mix of fury and sudden regret, as though she couldn't believe she'd crossed that line. Then, almost as quickly as it had happened, her features hardened again. She tried to regain control of the situation. "All of you, sit down," Vanessa barked, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. She stumbled into me and I reacted. Now everyone calm down." Her explanation did nothing to pacify the crowd. People were calling out, pointing phones at her. A few demanded that the flight crew restrain Vanessa immediately. Carla touched Dolores's shoulder gently and guided her down the aisle towards the galley. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Carla whispered, her voice laden with concern. Dolores, still in shock, managed only a shaky nod. She cradled her cheek, feeling the welling bruise. In the back of her mind, she could almost hear her son's voice telling her not to let anyone trample on her dignity. She held on to that thought, wondering what Mark would say if he could see this. While Carla took Dolores to the rear galley, passengers clamored for answers. Some demanded to speak to the captain. Others, who had captured the altercation on video, threatened to share it widely the moment they could connect to the internet. A sense of collective outrage filled the cabin. Even those who had been asleep or lost in music removed headphones to learn what was happening. Vanessa, for her part, looked like a cornered animal. She moved to the intercom, her voice shaky yet still authoritarian. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are handling the situation. The captain has been informed." Her words only fueled the flames of dissent. People shouted back, accusing her of lying or covering up her assault on an elderly passenger. The disruption threatened to spiral into a full-blown riot. In the rear galley, Carla offered Dolores a small towel with ice. Dolores pressed it to her cheek, wincing as the cold stung the fresh bruise. Carla's eyes brimmed with sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I've never seen Vanessa act this way. I promise we'll sort this out." Through chattering teeth, partly from the ice, partly from her rattled nerves, Dolores managed to say, "Please, I don't want to cause trouble. I only want to get to Los Angeles safely." Even as she uttered the words, a quiet resolve formed in her heart. She might not want to escalate matters, but that didn't mean she'd allow this wrongdoing to stand unaddressed. Carla nodded, looking torn. "One understand, ma'am, but this is serious. The captain will need your statement." She glanced anxiously down the aisle. A cluster of passengers argued with Vanessa, who was trying to maintain a semblance of order. Carla looked back at Dolores, a desperate apology in her eyes. "Let me get the captain back here." Dolores closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on slow, steady breathing. Her cheek pulsed with pain, and her mind swirled with 1,000 questions. Would they have to land somewhere else? What would her family think? The only thing she knew for sure was that in all her travels, she had never experienced anything so shocking, so humiliating. And yet, in the grand cosmic plan, the flight attendant slap was just the first falling domino. Larger revelations and retributions were careening their way down, unstoppable now. The captain, Captain Russell Finch, was a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience. His calm voice often reassured passengers, even in the most harrowing turbulence. But as he stepped into the rear galley, his expression was grim. He had been forced to leave the cockpit under autopilot control with the first officer in charge. The airline rarely approved of a captain leaving the flight deck, especially mid-route, but the gravity of the situation demanded it. He approached Dolores gently, eyeing the bruise forming on her cheek. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Finch. I'm very sorry for what happened. Are you hurt anywhere else?" Dolores straightened her shoulders. "Only my cheek and my dignity," she replied softly, forcing a small smile. Her voice still trembled with residual shock. She kept the ice pressed to her face. Captain Finch sighed. "We have protocols for incidents like this. Normally, if a crew member assaults a passenger, we're obligated to report it immediately to ground control and possibly divert the flight." He paused, a worried crease on his brow. "We have over 2 hours left to Los Angeles. We might need to make an emergency landing if the cabin environment is unsafe." Dolores's stomach twisted. An emergency landing meant further disruption, perhaps even legal entanglements. It would definitely delay her arrival. Then again, the idea of continuing a flight under the same roof as her attacker seemed equally untenable. She looked into Captain Finch's earnest eyes. "I just want to reach Los Angeles," she repeated. "But I also don't want anyone else to be hurt," Carla chimed in, explaining how the cabin had erupted into chaos. Passengers were demanding that Vanessa be contained. The captain pressed his lips together. "All right," he said at last. "We'll do this by the book." He flicked on his radio and began making calls to Delta's ground operations, informing them of the assault. Then he turned to Carla, instructing her to keep Dolores in the galley for her safety and to ask any witnesses to provide statements. Before Captain Finch departed, Dolores gently touched his arm. "Captain," she said, "this flight attendant, Vanessa, she seems extremely stressed. But that doesn't excuse her action." A swirl of emotion welled in her eyes. "Thank you for doing what's right." The captain nodded solemnly and left to restore some semblance of order in the cabin. Dolores closed her eyes, pressing the ice harder against her throbbing cheek. The plane droned on through the sky, carrying them all closer to Los Angeles and closer to the unraveling of more secrets than anyone could have anticipated. Back in the main cabin, Captain Finch took control of the public address system. His calm yet firm voice resonated through the aircraft, asking everyone to remain seated and promising that the situation was being handled. He assured them that safety was his top priority and that any inappropriate behavior by crew or passengers would be addressed. The cabin chatter softened, though tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Vanessa remained by the front galley, her face pale and drawn. Passengers scowled and whispered, some openly holding up their phones and recording her. She tried to muster an air of authority, but her shaky posture betrayed her. One of the first-class passengers, a corporate executive, by the look of his suit, demanded that Vanessa be restrained for assault. Others chimed in, echoing the sentiment. Vanessa looked around, cornered and alone. Carla approached hesitantly. "Vanessa, come with me," she said, her tone as gentle as possible. "The captain wants you seated in the jump seat at the front. He's moving you off the service rotation for the rest of this flight." Vanessa stared, panic flickering across her face. She tried to protest, but her voice came out in a hoarse croak. I was just defending myself," she said, unconvincingly. "You saw she, but the words died." She realized no one would believe her version, not with dozens of witnesses and videos. She clenched her jaw, refusing to say more. Carla escorted her to the jump seat, where Vanessa sat down, her eyes fixed on the bulkhead. From that vantage point, she could see the cabin of glaring faces, a silent jury condemning her. For the first time, she felt a flicker of real fear. She thought about how this might end: lawsuits, job loss, maybe even criminal charges. Her breath came in ragged bursts, and she suddenly wished she could vanish from sight. As the aircraft soared westward, a hush spread through the cabin, but it was a loaded silence, brimming with resentment and raw emotions. Passengers whispered among themselves, exchanging contact information to share footage, comforting Dolores' seatmate, who was shaken by what he'd witnessed. The entire cabin had taken on a surreal aura, as if a dark drama was unfolding in a space meant for calm transport. And in the jump seat, Vanessa realized she might have ignited a chain of events she could never reverse. Meanwhile, Dolores remained in the rear galley with Carla, feeling both physically and emotionally drained. Her cheeks still ached, but the ice pack had dulled the sting. Carla offered her a cup of tea, and Dolores accepted with shaky hands, taking small sips to soothe her frazzled nerves. Carla cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I need to gather a few details for the captain's incident report. I'm sorry to put you through this, but we need your official statement." Dolores nodded, setting the cup aside. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the events, how the collision happened, Vanessa's angry words, and finally the slap. At one point, her voice nearly cracked, and she had to pause, reminding herself to breathe. Carla listened attentively, taking notes on a small tablet. As Dolores finished, Carla placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for telling me everything. I'm so sorry this happened. I've never seen Vanessa behave this way." She paused, then ventured softly. "We're trying to reach ground control to decide if we need to land early. It's possible we'll continue to LAX, but security may meet the plane at the gate. You might be asked to talk to them." Dolores exhaled a shaky breath. "I understand," she said. Her hands trembled slightly around the teacup. She couldn't help but think of her son in that moment. Mark was the sort of person who would arrive with a dozen lawyers and hold the airline accountable. But Dolores wasn't Mark. She'd always been more understated, preferring peaceful resolutions. Yet she also couldn't ignore the wrong that had been done. As she wrestled with these thoughts, the faint lines around her eyes deepened with worry. The minutes dragged on as the plane streaked across the sky. Carla moved to help other passengers, leaving Dolores to her thoughts. In the quiet hum of the galley, she remembered how her late husband used to say, "Our true character is revealed when we stand up for what's right." She patted her bruised cheek gently and resolved to stand firm. She didn't seek vengeance, but she also refused to be silent about violence, especially unprovoked violence, against an elderly passenger. Little did she know that the greatest shock was still on its way when the flight reached its destination. Word spread rapidly among the passengers that Dolores might be someone important, given her dignified demeanor and the fact she'd been so quickly taken aside by the captain and Carla. Some speculated she was a VIP, an undercover inspector, or even part of some hidden camera expose. A few had overheard snippets of her phone calls earlier, though she'd been discreet, mentioning her son's official schedule in Los Angeles. Rumors sparked like wildfire, fueled by curiosity and the dramatic tension of the assault. Mid-flight, as the situation in the cabin grew quieter and more subdued, a fellow passenger, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached the rear galley cautiously. She introduced herself as Lisa and asked if she could speak with Dolores. Carla checked with Dolores, who nodded her permission. Lisa offered a sympathetic smile. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," she said softly. "What happened up there was appalling. I just can't believe it." She glanced at Dolores's cheek, now tinged purple around the edges where the bruise was forming. Dolores touched the spot gently. "It's tender," she admitted, "but I'll be all right. Thank you for asking." She managed a polite, though tight-lipped, smile. Lisa hesitated, then spoke with a curious glint. "A few folks around me mentioned they think you might be, well, connected. Are you someone important?" Her eyes conveyed genuine concern rather than mere nosiness. Dolores's hand fluttered to her collar. She considered her next words carefully. "I'm not anyone more important than you, or anyone else on this plane," she began delicately. "I'm just traveling to see my family." Lisa seemed relieved, yet still intrigued. She gave Dolores's arm a gentle squeeze. "Well, I just wanted to let you know we have your back. A bunch of us saw what happened, and we'll testify if you need us to." Then she left, returning to her seat. Dolores was touched. She realized that while the flight attendant's behavior had been an appalling example of cruelty, the other passengers had demonstrated kindness, solidarity, and empathy. It reminded her that in dire moments, humanity often rallied to protect the vulnerable. Little did she know that her identity would soon out itself in a dramatic confrontation at LAX. Shaking the flight attendant's world to its core, the remaining flight time felt like an eternity. Captain Finch made another announcement, informing everyone that the flight would continue on to Los Angeles as scheduled, but that airport authorities and airline representatives would meet them at the gate. He stressed the importance of everyone remaining calm and seated during descent, especially given the tension in the cabin. Vanessa remained silent in her jump seat, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. Occasionally, she sneaked glances at the cabin, only to meet disdainful stares. She could feel the weight of collective judgment pressing on her like a physical burden. Her mind was a whirl of regret, anger, and fear. How could I have lost control like that, she wondered. But each time she tried to muster sympathy for the elderly woman, her pride flared. She convinced herself that the incident was partly Dolores's fault for bumping into her. Pride, however, would not save her now. Meanwhile, Dolores sat quietly in the rear galley, Carla checking on her periodically. The ice pack had melted, leaving a wet patch on her blouse. She caught sight of herself in a small mirror near the galley sink, her cheek swollen, her expression weary. Part of her wrestled with the desire to call her son, but she didn't want to alarm him during a busy day. Another part whispered that Mark needed to know. In the end, she decided to wait until she landed. She'd handle this in person. At last, the announcement came to prepare for landing. Dolores was escorted back to her seat, where the kindly young man still sat. He greeted her with concern. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She nodded mutely, grateful for his sympathy, but feeling too drained to talk. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane made its final approach. Through the window, Dolores saw the sprawling lights of Los Angeles. Her heart tightened with a swirl of relief and trepidation. She prayed that once they touched ground, the ordeal would finally end. But sometimes the landing is just the beginning of the real turbulence. The wheels touched down on the runway of Los Angeles International Airport with a jolt that rattled the overhead bins. A collective sigh rippled through the cabin, relief that the flight was over, unease about what awaited them in the terminal. Through the window, Dolores glimpsed the busy tarmac, dotted with aircraft of all sizes, and she felt a wave of tension grip her. The seatbelt sign turned off, but an announcement quickly followed from Captain Finch, urging everyone to remain seated until authorities boarded. The words authorities sent a ripple of apprehension through passengers. Usually, upon landing, there was a mad dash to grab carry-ons and rush off the plane. Now, the aisles remained still, thick with an atmosphere of anticipation. Carla and another attendant opened the forward door. Within moments, 2 airport police officers and 2 airline representatives stepped on board, scanning the cabin with serious faces. They asked for the assaulted passenger. Dolores shifted in her seat, feeling an uncomfortable spotlight draw near. At Carla's direction, the authorities moved down the aisle until they reached Dolores, who stood shakily. She offered a polite nod, ignoring the throb in her cheek. The officers kindly asked her to gather her belongings and come with them. Before Dolores could move, another official approached Vanessa, who was pale and shaking, hands fidgeting in her lap. They asked her to step off the plane for questioning as well. Passengers watched, enthralled, some filming discreetly. A few jeers and murmurs of contempt followed Vanessa as she walked the aisle. She clenched her jaw, refusing to acknowledge the stares. As Dolores collected her carry-on from the overhead bin, helped once again by the young man, she nearly dropped it. Her hands trembling, she felt more self-conscious than ever. People whispered supportive words, offering hope you're okay and we're behind you. Dolores mustered grateful nods, her throat too tight to speak. Then she followed the officers off the aircraft, stepping onto the jet bridge. She didn't know that a final, thunderous twist was about to erupt in the corridors of LAX. Stepping into the bustling terminal felt like entering a different world, one lit by bright fluorescent lights, filled with the cacophony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and chatter in a dozen languages. But for Dolores, the immediate surroundings blurred, overshadowed by the uniformed officers guiding her toward a discreet area near the gate. Vanessa was likewise escorted in a separate direction, flanked by airline representatives. Captain Finch joined the group of officials waiting for Dolores. He offered a small nod of reassurance. "I'll provide my account as well," he told her gently, then stepped aside to speak with the authorities. Carla hovered in the background, her expression a mixture of sympathy and relief that Dolores was safely on the ground. Suddenly, a bustle of motion caught everyone's attention. A cluster of sharply dressed individuals, some in suits, others in casual but professional attire, hurried through the terminal, led by a tall, imposing figure. Dolores blinked, her heart seizing in surprise. It was her son, Governor Mark Montgomery, flanked by his security detail and a couple of aides. Word must have reached him that something had happened on her flight. Before Dolores could fully process it, Mark was rushing toward her, arms outstretched. "Mom, are you all right?" His voice carried a mixture of concern and anger, and his gaze zeroed in on the bruise marring her cheek. Dolores opened her mouth to answer, but emotion choked her words. She nodded, tears threatening to break free. Mark gently cupped her face, examining the swollen skin. Rage flickered in his eyes. His security detail and aides began asking questions, conferring with the officers. Passengers who had also disembarked were wide-eyed, realizing who Dolores really was. Murmurs spread. "She's the governor's mother." Amid the swirling tension, Vanessa, still being questioned by airline reps, glanced over. When she saw the governor of the state cradling the older woman's face, her expression went ashen. All the color drained from her cheeks. She might have guessed Dolores had some status, but not in her wildest dreams had she imagined this. The scale of her mistake hit her like a tidal wave. An uproar ensued, with reporters tipped off by the sudden political entourage at the airport scrambling to converge on the gate area. Microphones and cameras materialized, capturing the emotional scene of Governor Montgomery comforting his elderly mother, who still bore the mark of violence on her cheek. Airport security tried to maintain a perimeter, but the swirling press was relentless. Vanessa stood on the periphery, her entire body trembling. She realized the repercussions of her actions had just multiplied exponentially. Attacking an elderly passenger was bad enough. Attacking the governor's mother was political dynamite. She could hear the murmurs among airline officials. "We have to handle this carefully. This is a PR nightmare." Vanessa's finished. Panic and shame warred within her. She wanted to run, but she was effectively detained for questioning. Governor Montgomery demanded answers, his voice resonating with righteous anger. Captain Finch, calm as ever, explained the incident from his perspective. Carla provided a more detailed account, including how Dolores had been respectful throughout the entire flight and how Vanessa had repeatedly displayed aggression. The airport police officers took statements from multiple passengers, many eager to share the videos captured on their phones. Dolores, her arm linked with her son's, tried to maintain composure amidst the frenzy. She kept repeating that she didn't want to press charges immediately, only that the matter be investigated properly. Mark looked at his mother, surprise in his eyes. "Mom, she assaulted you. You have every right to press charges," he insisted. But Dolores shook her head softly. "Let's see what the law says. I trust the process." Vanessa heard this exchange and found it baffling. She had expected immediate legal wrath, yet Dolores seemed strangely lenient. It was almost more unnerving than open hostility. And as reporters snapped pictures, capturing her guilty face in the background, Vanessa realized there was no escaping the storm now. Any illusions of saving her career or even her reputation were slipping away like sand through her fingers. In a nearby airport office, Dolores, Governor Montgomery, Captain Finch, Carla, and the airline representatives gathered to speak privately, away from the gawking crowds. The police took formal statements. Dolores recounted the assault, her voice subdued but firm, and Mark stood beside her, occasionally stepping in with clarifying questions. One of the airline representatives, a senior manager named Olivia Pierce, looked mortified, repeatedly apologizing for the inexcusable behavior of her employee. Meanwhile, Vanessa was sequestered in another office, where she too was questioned by officials. Her defense was flimsy, an alleged misunderstanding, claiming Dolores had collided with her. But with multiple witness accounts and video evidence, it was clear that Vanessa had escalated the conflict beyond any reasonable measure. The only question was how severe her punishment would be. Governor Montgomery turned to Olivia Pierce. "I expect Delta Airlines to handle this swiftly and transparently," he said, his voice calm but laced with undertones of paternal fury. Olivia nodded fervently. "Of course, Governor. We take this very seriously. Rest assured, Miss Caldwell's employment status is under immediate review for termination. We'll also fully cooperate with any legal investigation." Dolores placed a hand on her son's arm, her gaze steady. "I don't want to use your position to influence the outcome," she said quietly. "The law should run its course." Her humility contrasted sharply with the high-stakes environment where everyone seemed on edge in the governor's presence. Mark turned to his mother, eyes full of concern. "Mom, you're bruised. She humiliated you in front of everyone." He exhaled, trying to keep his temper in check. "You sure you're okay?" Dolores nodded, managing a gentle smile that belied the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'm not all right, but I will be," she said, glancing at Carla and the captain in gratitude for their professionalism. She turned back to Olivia Pierce. "I appreciate your apologies, Miss Pierce, and I trust you'll take the right steps." Outside, the swirling crowd of media waited, hungry for a sensational headline. As the night wore on, the airport staff hustled to contain the spectacle. But Dolores sensed that the real resolution would not come from press conferences or quick apologies. It would emerge from the consequences Vanessa would soon face, and the lessons learned by everyone who witnessed the flight attendant's cruelty. At last, the formalities wound down. Dolores gave her final statement to the officers, who informed her she could pursue criminal charges if she wished. For now, Dolores said she would reflect and consult with her son. Governor Montgomery offered to have his legal team look into it. Vanessa was suspended without pay, pending an internal airline investigation. She sat in a separate waiting room, hands trembling in her lap, the reality sinking in that she had likely lost her job. A sense of dread gnawed at her, imagining the imminent headlines. Dolores and the governor emerged into the corridor where Mark's security detail guarded them from the press. Cameras flashed and a cacophony of questions flew. "Governor, do you plan to sue the airline?" "Ma'am, how do you feel about being assaulted? Is this a failure of airline safety protocols?" Mark shielded his mother, guiding her gently through the throng. They offered no statements, ignoring the shouted inquiries. Finally, in the private comfort of Mark's SUV, with tinted windows shielding them from the frenzy outside, Dolores felt her tension release in a shuddering sigh. She sank back against the leather seat, placing a hand over her swollen cheek. Mark reached out, touching her shoulder. "I'm sorry you went through that," he murmured. "I should have been there to protect you." Dolores managed a faint smile. "You couldn't have known. I didn't want special treatment, remember?" A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly brushed it away. Still, it was quite an experience. Her voice wavered. Mark looked at her bruised face, guilt etched into his features. "I'll handle the legal side. We can't let her get away with assault." Dolores swallowed. "She won't get away with it, but I don't want to become vindictive. Let's see what the airline decides, and if we need to press charges, we'll do so by the book. No political strings." Her clarity in the face of wrongdoing shone as a testament to her character. As the SUV pulled away from the terminal, Dolores reflected on the entire ordeal. It was a painful reminder that cruelty can spring forth even in mundane settings. Yet it also underscored how kindness, like that shown by Carla and other passengers, could bring solace. She knew her life would soon return to normal, but for Vanessa Caldwell, a tidal wave of consequences was just beginning. Vanessa's life descended into chaos almost immediately. By the next morning, videos of the incident had gone viral, racking up millions of views across social media platforms. Online commentators raged at the injustice of a flight attendant assaulting an elderly passenger, particularly one who turned out to be the governor's mother. The media circus fueled calls for an official apology from the airline, which arrived swiftly in a press release condemning Vanessa's actions. Her phone rang incessantly calls from unknown numbers, journalists, even distant relatives who had caught wind of her disgrace. Desperate for a lifeline, Vanessa reached out to her union representative, only to learn that the union was reluctant to offer a strong defense given the evidence. She realized in a moment of cold clarity that she was alone, stranded by her own lapse of judgment and uncontrolled anger. While the public devoured every new detail of the scandal, Dolores tried to resume a semblance of normalcy. She spent the next few days recuperating at her son's residence, attending her granddaughter's graduation ceremony with quiet pride. The bruise on her cheek slowly faded from purple to yellowish green, a stark reminder of how quickly one act of violence can alter an entire chain of events. She received endless messages of support, including heartfelt apologies from high-level executives at Delta Airlines. Sitting on Mark's veranda one afternoon, Dolores sipped tea and contemplated how best to proceed regarding Vanessa. Press charges? Sue the airline? She'd never sought to weaponize her status, nor did she revel in revenge. Yet she felt a responsibility to stand up for elderly travelers who might be mistreated. Her experiences had shown her how the system could fail those without powerful connections. Then again, she also believed in second chances, a belief that had guided her parenting and her volunteer work with youth offenders in the past. As the day stretched on, Dolores prayed for clarity. She couldn't possibly know that fate would place Vanessa directly in her path again, sooner than expected, offering them both an unforeseen opportunity for understanding and for karmic retribution. A week after the incident, Dolores found herself standing in front of the Los Angeles County Courthouse, her reflection glinting in the tall windows. This was where the preliminary hearing would take place if formal charges were pressed. Governor Montgomery had arranged for his mother to meet with a district attorney to discuss the case. The swirl of cameras followed them, though Mark's press secretary tried to keep the meeting discreet. Inside the courthouse, the long corridors smelled of antiseptic cleaning agents and echoed with the quiet shuffle of attorneys and civilians awaiting legal proceedings. Mark guided Dolores to a meeting room where an assistant district attorney, a thoughtful woman named Adriana, greeted them. "Miss Montgomery," Adriana said respectfully, "we understand the airline has suspended the flight attendant. There's ample video and eyewitness testimony to support an assault charge. The question is whether you wish to proceed with criminal prosecution." Dolores glanced at her son, who nodded in silent support. Then she spoke quietly, choosing her words with care. "Miss Caldwell's actions were unacceptable. If we don't hold people accountable, what's to prevent this from happening again? But I also believe in compassion. I want to know if there's a path for her to learn from this, rather than just be punished." Adriana looked intrigued. "That's possible. We can discuss restorative justice programs, or possibly a plea deal if she's willing to publicly apologize and attend anger management. But that depends on Miss Caldwell's willingness." Mark folded his arms, studying his mother with a hint of pride. "I support whatever you decide," he said softly. They were finalizing details when an officer knocked on the door, informing them that Vanessa Caldwell had arrived in the building. Dolores's stomach fluttered with a complex mix of trepidation and resolve. She hadn't expected to see the disgraced flight attendant so soon. A part of her feared the encounter. Another part was ready to see if Vanessa would show remorse, if there was space for healing and restitution, or if the situation would escalate into a full-blown trial. The future of both women hung in the balance, awaiting the next twist in fate's design. Dolores sat in a quiet conference room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Her son had stepped outside to confer with the district attorney, leaving her alone momentarily. She needed that solitude to steady her emotions. When the door opened, Vanessa Caldwell walked in, flanked by her lawyer, an older man with a weary expression. Vanessa's eyes flickered with nervousness, darting around the room as if searching for an exit. She looked drastically different from the polished flight attendant Dolores remembered, her hair loose and unkempt, her face drawn with dark circles under her eyes. Dolores stood, offering a polite nod. It was an odd moment, both women weighed down by the memory of that humiliating flight. Vanessa's lawyer cleared his throat, but Vanessa unexpectedly spoke first. I want to say I'm sorry, she stammered, voice cracking. Tears welled in her eyes. She managed to look Dolores in the face, noting the faint discoloration still on her cheek. A flicker of guilt etched into Vanessa's features. Dolores felt a softening in her chest, though she remained cautious. I appreciate that, she replied gently. But an apology alone can't erase what happened. Vanessa swallowed hard. I know, she said, her voice trembling. I panicked. I was stressed, but that's no excuse. She hesitated, glancing at her lawyer, who pursed his lips but didn't stop her. I lost my temper, and I know I've ruined my career. I just want to say I never meant to hurt you. I'm ashamed. Dolores exhaled slowly. Shame can be the beginning of change if you let it. She studied the younger woman, wondering if the remorse was genuine or self-serving. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Eventually speaking up to propose a plea arrangement, Vanessa would plead guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge, offer a formal public apology, and attend court-mandated anger management. In return, Dolores could decline to pursue felony charges, sparing Vanessa a harsher sentence. There, in the sterile conference room, Dolores had a choice. Justice demanded accountability, but compassion beckoned for a chance at redemption. She turned over the possibilities in her mind. I need to see that you're sincere, she finally said, meeting Vanessa's gaze. Not for my sake, but for yours and for anyone else you might encounter in the future. You have to own what you did and make it right. Vanessa nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. In that moment, Dolores felt the stirring of empathy. She resolved to trust her instincts, hoping the flight attendant might embrace this second chance. If not, there would be consequences, one way or another. Several days later, news broke that Vanessa Caldwell had publicly apologized in a statement written and recorded for a press conference. She admitted fault, expressed remorse for her actions, and volunteered to speak at airline training sessions on managing stress and anger. The district attorney's office confirmed a plea deal, with Vanessa avoiding jail time if she completed anger management classes and a probationary period. The public reaction was mixed. Some believed she got off too lightly, especially given she had struck an elderly woman who was also the governor's mother. Others acknowledged Dolores's magnanimity and praised the approach of restoration over severe punishment. Through it all, Dolores maintained a quiet dignity, refusing multiple interview requests. She allowed a single statement to be released through her son's office, emphasizing the importance of accountability, healing, and the hope that Vanessa could learn from her mistake. And learn she did, it seemed. Forced into mandated therapy sessions, Vanessa found her perspective shifting. Each session made her confront her pent-up anger and the triggers that caused her to lash out. Without the protective facade of her flight attendant uniform and authority, she faced the raw truth of her actions. It was a humbling process, one that she realized she needed desperately, far beyond just clearing her legal record. In the midst of this personal reckoning, Vanessa received an unexpected letter. It came from Dolores, handwritten, delivered through the district attorney's office. The letter was concise, offering words of encouragement and urging Vanessa to embrace the chance to grow. She read it in tears, feeling a spark of gratitude for a woman she had wronged so gravely. In a world that often clamored for swift vengeance, Dolores had shown her compassion, and that felt like a heavier, more meaningful lesson than any prison sentence could have provided. Months passed, and while the public's memory of the scandal faded, the impact on those directly involved remained vivid. Dolores returned to her routine of community, volunteering, and quiet family gatherings. The bruise on her cheek had long healed, but her resolve to stand against injustice became stronger. She teamed up with advocacy groups to champion better training and oversight for airline staff, aiming to prevent similar incidents. Occasionally, she thought of Vanessa and hoped the young woman found a better path. Vanessa, on the other hand, spent her probationary period reflecting on her life choices. She took a part-time job at a local diner, humbling work compared to her old role in the skies, but it allowed her time to attend her mandatory therapy and anger management classes. With each lesson, she unearthed deeper issues, grief she'd never processed, workplace stress she'd ignored, unhealthy coping mechanisms she'd fostered. Slowly, she felt herself transforming, forging a new sense of empathy and patience. In a final twist of fate, the two women crossed paths again at a charity event for seniors, one that Dolores had helped organize and Vanessa attended as part of her community service. Their eyes met across the room, and Vanessa approached, head bowed. Dolores welcomed her with a warm, forgiving smile. In that moment, the karmic cycle felt complete. Vanessa had paid dearly for her deed, but she'd also been given the gift of redemption. Dolores had suffered a painful blow, but she now stood as a catalyst for change, drawing strength from adversity. For a heartbeat, they spoke in hushed tones, neither quite sure of what to say. Then Dolores extended a hand. Vanessa hesitated, tears in her eyes, and accepted it. The handshake was gentle, signifying that though the past could not be erased, it could be redeemed. And so, as the evening air cooled, they parted ways, two souls intertwined in a dramatic story of impulsive violence, life-altering consequences, and, ultimately, the grace of forgiveness. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey, where a single moment of anger set off a chain of life-changing events. From the tension-filled cabin to the public fallout, we witnessed how swiftly a life can unravel and how unexpectedly redemption can emerge. This story reminds us that no one is truly ordinary. Behind the simplest faces lie untold depths, and the seeds of both harm and healing can bloom where we least expect. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, please